All right. So tonight we're looking at Tigran Petrosian, who was the 9th champion of the world, I believe. 9th world champion after Tal. Tal, then Botvinnik, and then Petrosian, and then Spassky, and then Fischer, just to help orient you into his timeline. So reached his peak in the late 50s to late 60s. And so we're going to go over some biographical aspects of his life, and Warren, as always, is going to regale us with some interesting chess positions and chess games played by Mr. Petrosian. We'll start with the fact that Petrosian is pronounced just that way with 4 syllables. It is an Armenian name, not necessarily a Russian name, and that makes it somewhat easier for an English speaker to pronounce, luckily. And it also means, incidentally, that Petrosian's first language was Armenian. Now, when I first saw Tigran, I was like, oh, come on, you've got to nickname him the Tiger. It just flows so well in English. But when I was reading, I came across a quote from Dr. Uwa, who said, Petrosian is not a tiger that pounces on its prey, but rather a python that smothers its victim. So let's not think of him as a tiger, let's think of him as the python. And he was also called Iron Tigran for his impenetrable defense, which we'll get into. So Petrosian was born in Georgia, the country of Georgia, which at the time of his birth was a part of the USSR, of the Soviet Union. And he was born in Tbilisi, which when he was born was called Tiflis. He was born to Armenian parents, however, and so it would be more apt, well, actually both countries, now they're both independent nations, both countries claim him. So he's a national hero of Armenia, and he's also a national hero of Georgia. And he spent the first 16 years of his life in Georgia, moved to Armenia for 4 years, and then the rest of his life he pretty much lived in Moscow. So if you want to think of him as Russian or Armenian or Georgian, any of those can work. So he was, interesting thing about Georgia, as I was doing a little research for this lecture, I reminded myself of the fact that Georgia is the place where in 2008 some pro-Russian separatists claimed that South Ossetia was going to be an autonomous region that was going to hopefully get annexed by Russia, and Russia sent troops in to help those separatists, remain autonomous from the government of Georgia, and those soldiers 6 years later are still there. And it's an interesting parallel, I think, with the situation in Ukraine, showing that Russia, even though they've renounced, or even though the Soviet Union broke up in 1991, they still have their eyes on former territories, Ukraine and Georgia figuring prominently among those. Okay, so you may know Armenia for a couple of other reasons when we talk about chess. There are a couple of fairly famous chess players from Armenia or of Armenian descent. You may know off the top of their head? Kasparov, was born in Azerbaijan, neighboring country, but to an Armenian mother. Yeah. Levon Aronian, from Armenia as well. And we're going to see this interesting combination of Armenian descent and of like Jewish descent or association for a couple of different players, Kasparov, Aronian, and Petrosian as well. He married his wife was Jewish. So it's interesting though also that to my knowledge, Petrosian was the first really strong player from Armenia, and he really, by becoming a national hero, he became a sort of figurehead and an inspiration to a younger generation. And I think Kasparov and Aronian may not have attained their same status, without, or their same stature in chess, if they had not had someone like Petrosian to come along and kind of blaze a trail. So Petrosian's childhood was very modest. He was born to a man by the name of Vartan Petrosian, and his father and his mother, I couldn't find her name anywhere. I looked in every single book I had and online, and I couldn't find it. If you can, I would love to know it. His father was a caretaker at a an institution pictured here called the Tbilisi House of Officers. This was almost like a retirement home for retired military officers, veterans of, say, World War I and previous service. And his father was tasked with cleaning, the facility and organizing activities and things of that nature. And that's how the Petrosian family was able to pay the bills, have a roof over their head. They lived in that facility, and that's how they, earned money for food. It's interesting, at this House of Officers, one of the primary pastimes for the people there was backgammon. And so young Petrosian became very skilled and adept at board games, including backgammon, and that was kind of his first love. And people there did play chess, but Petrosian, number one, didn't know how to play, and number two, was kind of too modest to ask. And so all these people were playing chess, and he wasn't, it was just going on beside him. He wasn't getting involved in it until later on. So he started off very good at backgammon. He could beat pretty much everybody that played there. He was also a prolific learner. He learned to read and write at a very early age, which is actually shocking because his father was illiterate. He started school at a young age. He finished school at a young age. And as far as I could tell, he achieved nothing but perfect grades throughout his school career. But he did not then progress past secondary school, did not go to university, at least there. He did in his middle ages, I should say. But so he was not a particularly well-educated person, as you might expect as a child of illiterate, laborers. Now, he had a somewhat unhappy childhood in that his father, who was quite a bit older, he was in his 70s, passed away. This is during World War II, when the German battle lines are advancing toward Armenia. They never quite reached it. And this is also when rationing is occurring, and there's the siege of Leningrad, which we talked about for the Soviet School of Chess. So supplies and rations kind of hard to get, rationing throughout the Russian Empire, and there's a strain on food, medical supplies, everything. And Petrosian's father passes away. His mother passes away shortly thereafter, and Petrosian is 14 years old. Now, he does have an older brother and an older sister. His older brother, however, is serving in the army. His older sister is married. And Petrosian, there's really no care, there's no orphanage or foster family or anything. So what Petrosian does is he essentially assumes his father's responsibilities, and he takes care of this House of Officers in Tbilisi. And that's how he keeps a roof over his head, and that's how he keeps food in his stomach. And it means that he's getting up very early in the morning to shovel snow from the roads, which he found shameful. And that he's going to school right after that. When he comes home from school, he's taking care of the officers who are there. Some were recalled into the military, even though they were at advanced age. Some are still there. And he's trying to fit in chess during this time. He started playing chess around age 11, and he went to the what's called the House of Pioneers. And I've mentioned the House of Pioneers both for Nimzovich and for Tal, and I'm mentioning it again for Petrosian. It was an important institution for young men, primarily men, some women, to learn, skilled trades and also to explore interests, including chess. So he started playing at 11, and at 14 he was basically on his own, and he had to take care of himself and his father's responsibilities. That's quite a bit to take on during the middle of the harshest war that the Soviet Union has ever, or that Russia has ever experienced, and that really any nation's ever experienced. As I told you during the Soviet School of Chess lesson, Operation Barbarossa killed about 20 million Russians. Speaking in terms of chess, Petrosian said that his strongest influences in his childhood were Nimzovich and Capablanca. And you may see parallels to their styles. You may see some of their ideas come up in tonight's analysis. To give you the history, though, Petrosian used to buy used books at a used bookstore, chess books. And the first book that he bought was Chess Praxis by Nimzovich, the one he published in 1927, I think. and it was profoundly influential on young Petrosian. Petrosian would buy other chess books, sell them back so he could buy others, but he never sold his copy of Chess Praxis. And he said that he read it so many times that he had it memorized cover to cover. He said that, and actually you may remember me saying that Tal praised Petrosian for his knowledge of Nimzovich's concepts and his expansion of Nimzovich's concepts. Capablanca also was a strong influence, not only because Petrosian identified with his positional style, but also because one of his tutors at the Palace of Pioneers was a strong proponent of Capablanca's style, and that was certainly influential on young Petrosian. Later on, Petrosian said that he was influenced by Rubinstein, Akiba Rubinstein. He praised his deep understanding of positions, but that didn't come until the 1950s, when Petrosian was in his early 30s, essentially, when he was kind of at the peak of his chess playing and contending for all these titles, as we'll get to. Now, I do need to get one thing out of the way pretty soon. People have said, well, he was inspired by Capablanca and he played kind of like Capablanca, and it was kind of boring like Capablanca, and he drew a lot. There's some truth to that if you look at, and I didn't look at every single grandmaster I could think of, but I did some pretty significant research of like 30 different GMs or so from the 20th century, and I couldn't find anybody who had a higher draw percentage than Petrosian. He had about 2,000 games, and as you see, over 1,000 of them were drawn, and most, Spassky was really close. Petrosian was still slightly higher, but otherwise most players of this time period had lower draw ratios, and I couldn't find anybody in modern chess. I even looked like at Topalov and a couple of others, and I couldn't find anybody who drew as many matches as Petrosian. But what you should take away from that is that he was very hard to beat. Now, I've mentioned that he was influenced by Capablanca. I've mentioned that he was influenced by Nimzovich. You should know that he had a tutor in Tbilisi. His name was Arlik Eberlidze, I guess. And one of Eberlidze's favorite openings was a Karo Khan, so that was something that Petrosian played quite a bit when he was young. An interesting fact, in 1942, David Bronstein was stuck in Tbilisi. Travel in the Soviet Union was very difficult. You know, while Leningrad was under siege and Moscow was devoting all of its resources to trying to keep the German advance from going any further east. And so travel within the country is extremely limited. Bronstein had traveled to Tbilisi for a tournament and then was stuck there for a couple seasons. And Petrosian used to pass him all the time in the park. Bronstein would be in one of the public parks with his pocket chess set, and he would be staring at it, looking at a position, just walking around thinking to himself. And every now and then he'd have to catch himself so he didn't fall into one of the trenches that had been dug in case they had to repel a German advance. And so at this time, you know, Bronstein is older than Petrosian, and they're not the same level of player at this point. Petrosian isn't even close to becoming a master yet, and Bronstein is. But they did exchange pleasantries. They did form an acquaintance, and so there were some good chess influences in Tbilisi, even during the war. So, in 1945, at the age of 16, Petrosian becomes the champion of Georgia. He even beats his former tutor. Who, you know, they stayed friends for a long time. And the prize, you know, nowadays we think of cash prizes, and you may remember for Alyekin, he got this big, nice vase that he kept with him for years and years. Petrosian got a coat, that coat in the left picture, and he was very, very happy to get this coat. Coats were quite the luxury during the war because fabric was being used for uniforms and, you know, canvas for bags and transportation, this, that, and the other. So getting a coat was a rare feat. In fact, he talks about Bronstein having like a thin cotton jacket as he's in the winter, you know. So he eventually had a better coat than Bronstein even. So that coat was a couple sizes too big, but he wore it with pride. And so that's the youngest photo I could find of Petrosian. And then you see how he looked in 1953 when he was a little older. Now, again, at the age of 16, he left Georgia, Yeah, that was under the advice of an Armenian master. He took a position auspiciously to teach chess at a chess club in Armenia. This is after the war has just ended, but really he was there to improve himself. He stayed there. He lived there for about 4 years. He did go to an Armenian school. His first language was Armenian. In fact, he didn't speak Georgian as well as he spoke Armenian. Somebody asked him, actually Jenna Sasanko asked him later in life, they said, so can you speak Georgian? And he said, well, I speak enough to flirt with girls, but that's about it. And so he was more at home surrounded by Armenians, and this is a theme that's going to come up later with his popularity among that ethnicity. And so with all that said, I want to turn it over to Warren for our first little interlude here. He's going to show you a couple of early matches that Petrosian played.
Thanks, Lucas. And we got it here. And I'm pretty excited for this one because, for me personally, Petrosian probably had one of the greater influences on my chess understanding. He just made a huge impression. He was really much different than a lot of other chess players. So I had mentioned in the lecture with Al Yakin that there are, generally speaking anyway, 3 ways of evaluating position. You have material, you have time, and you have quality of position. Al Yakin really introduced some revolutions with the idea of time, sacrificing material to gain time and development and such. And Petrosian was really the first player since Nimzovich to emphasize quality position so much. And there are a couple of really great examples of this. Now you had Reshevsky and Pilnik. Those are the first 2.
Yeah, I had Reshevsky and Pilnik. Yeah.
Okay. And this was the earliest game I selected. This is from the Zurich Candidates Tournament in 1953. So this is a position of his against Samuel Reshevsky. And it's Petrosian's move here is black, and black's position really is not doing so well. White has the 2 bishops, 2 pawns in the center, kind of barreling down, and black's kingside pawn majority is obviously not going anywhere, and his queenside majority is also stymied. So in this difficult position, he found a pretty incredible move that even computers today don't really fully appreciate. And this is the kind of move that really falls in line with what I was talking about, quality of position over material. And I mean, here it's also gain time. But, so I would take a moment here, and I'm making the video editing hard for Lucas. Take a moment and see what you can figure out about this position. What would Petrosian play? While you're thinking, I'll also talk through just how you might go about this position.
So you basically hinted at a sack, right?
I will mention that after I give the move or someone finds it, yes. Although it may be not the sacrifice you're thinking of. So looking at this position, what would be a fantastic square for that black knight? And there's more than one right answer. Well, yeah, d3 would be pretty dreamy. Yeah, b3, I don't see a target for it. d3 would be a fantastic square, although we must also be practical. I don't see a very easy route for that knight to get there.
d5 or e6.
Yeah, d5 or e6. Now, e6 is a good square because it blockades the e-pawn, but d5 is a better square because it also prepares a b4 advance, and because it attacks white's queen on f4, rook on e3. So you might envision playing knight d5 and then b4, and then somehow pushing your c-pawn through. So ideally, that's the kind of square you want for your knight in this position. But it's not so easy. I mean, right now, with the pieces where they are, you're going to have to play moves like knight b8, knight d7, knight b6, and only then knight d5. But that's very slow, and white's not going to do nothing. In fact, white wants to play e6 here, try to open up the position. So black really doesn't have time for such a long maneuver. So in this position, you need to think about how you can get that knight to d5 while simultaneously stopping white from crashing through with pawns.
So rook to e6.
And that is what he played. Yeah, just iron Tigran logic. Although, if you think about it in the sense that I just explained, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Although normally most chess players are sane and they don't just put a rook on 3 to a bishop like that. But this is what I was talking about, his prioritization of quality position over material. So, and this is his characteristic exchange sacrifice. He was very well known for this. He would give rooks away for minor pieces a lot of times, just for very nebulous looking compensation. But here the point is now that black's going to have time for knight e7, d5. And white no longer can push his e-pawn. The character of the position suddenly changes. It went from a nice open position, white was just trying to figure out how to crash through. Now white's pawns are stuck, and his b2 bishop's passiveness is felt more now. And Reshevsky was pretty shocked as well. He played a4. Yeah, he didn't even take it. I mean, he also probably figured that black was not going to play rook e7 either, so it wasn't very risky per se, but definitely has some shock value. Although after Petrosian plays knight e7, now white has to take the rook or lose the chance to. But positionally now, black is just doing wonderfully. In fact, it's really kind of difficult to handle white's position here, because black's threatening knight d5. And for example, say white were to play a move like queen f2. And then black could play knight d5. And if you assume rook f3. And by the way, the computer recommends this path temporarily until it realizes white's complete lack of counterplay. But now after a move like b4, it's becoming clear that white's prospects are not very good here. The position is completely closed and white's rooks are without targets. So the quality of the position for black is just really high here. So Reshevsky planned on sacking the exchange back. So he played the queen back to f1, which may look ridiculous because the bishop will come to d3, but when that happens, he just chops it. So now the position has gotten back to a sort of balance. And at this point, it's somewhat equal. Here is probably the last chance for white to complicate. White could have played c4 here, although as Bronstein notes in the 53 tournament book, this would give white excellent chances of both winning and of losing. So Reshevsky was kind of shell-shocked by Petrosian's rook e6 move, so I don't think he was feeling very ambitious after that. So he just traded pawns. And now, despite the extra pawn for white, it's just an equal endgame. The final endgame position is somewhat instructive. And here, Reshevsky offered a draw which Petrosian accepted. So play might go, for example, rook a6, queen c8. But here it's just a dead draw. The extra pawn is meaningless here, because white's never going to be able to make a pass out of this pair. Black can just play king h7, h8, and white's not going to be making any progress here. So this is a great example of Petrosian playing defense at his finest, finding a really creative resource in a difficult position. So does anybody have any questions about that game? Yeah.
What does the computer say on that move?
On rook e6?
Yeah.
So going back to that, the computer prefers rook a7.
Still moves it.
With the same idea of knight e7, yes. But the computer underestimates e6.
Yeah, I was wondering.
Yeah, I mean, it does recommend, after this situation, f6, but I don't know exactly. Depends on what computer you have, what the positions to be rated, but it's going to be anywhere between 1.5 to 2 pawns for white. But this is a very hard position to handle for black, as opposed to just playing rook e6 and sacrificing the rook. After you play rook e6 and play a few moves, the computer will appreciate it.
What about if you give the computer a whole lot of time?
Now that I did not test. Kasparov also mentions, he had the same results as me basically. He said the computer underestimates the value of rook e6 as opposed to rook a7. With today's engines, I don't have Komodo, for example, so maybe that engine would see rook e6 in a heartbeat, but at least Houdini 1.5 doesn't see rook e6 as the best move. Any other questions about that game? Okay. That game, for me personally, made a huge impression, playing a move like Rook E6. And in my own games, I'll look for similarly kind of nebulous-looking rook sacrifices. I love having minor pieces on excellent squares. So.
I
Now,
have one more question, sorry.
oh, sure.
I just remembered it.
About the game?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there a way that you see to get back the material, to counter it somehow?
For white?
For white, yeah.
Well, that is what Reshevsky did. He played queen f1, and then he captured on d3 when black put the bishop there. Is that what you're referring to?
Black's giving the rook, right?
Yeah.
Is there a way to keep white's momentum going and give let's say a rook or something or whatever? It's kind
For
of
white?
needed to counter that e6 move.
To counter black's exchange sacrifice?
Yeah.
That's basically what he did with bishop d3. Yeah, Bronstein had some beautiful words. I should have written them down about this game. He said where Petrosian's iron logic met Reshevsky's something diagonals. It was a beautiful sentence. I wish I would have written it down, but yeah, I mean, here, this was probably the best way for white to give back the exchange.
Oh, okay. I didn't see that rest of it. I was thinking.
Yeah. That was how the material equality happened later.
Oh, so that's what happened. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So now let's go to this next position. And this was also from a candidates in 1956, I believe. It was another candidates tournament, I think. Yeah. And this is a position, Petrosian is white, of course, from one of his King's Indian games. And in case you didn't know, Petrosian loved playing against the King's Indian. I don't know who quoted him as saying this, but he is supposedly to have said, "Because of the King's Indian, I am able to feed my family." So he did not have a very high regard for this opening. He really liked playing against it, and his results kind of spoke to that too. He scored pretty well against it. And now here in this position, it's a interesting situation. White's position looks pretty dominant, but at the moment, everything for black is defended. Now, what's the most obvious way, just looking at this position, that white can improve and attack black? One way probably comes to mind for most chess players.
Knight c4.
Right, knight c4, attacking d6, attacking b6. It's just a great square for the knight. But at the moment, if you play knight c4, black is just going to take your e-pawn. So Petrosian, of course, saw that c4 is this great square for the knight, but you have to protect this pawn. Now, what would you say to a move like bishop g2? He did not play this, but can you guess why he rejected this?
Some control of the good diagonal.
Yeah, the bishop was well placed. Why put a piece simply to guard a pawn like that? That was well placed. Now, another alternative might be f3. And yes, I am giving away he didn't play either one. But why would he direct a move like f3?
Weakens the king side.
Yeah, it weakens the king side. It opens up this 7th rank, which could be crucial later on if white wants to keep the king safe. And it also weakens this diagonal. Suddenly black could move the king and bring the bishop to h6, and that bishop could be a beast. So this is a problem for white. So you got to figure out a way how to improve your position, bringing the knight to c4, but not losing that e-pawn. What was that?
Queen b1.
Queen b1, he did not play this. I think the reason he did not play queen b1 is because queen on b4 is well placed, attacking d6, right?
Queen b1, he will take any four. Honestly.
Now he's saying queen b1.
Point b1.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he rejected it because the queen, he likes it where it is right now.
Does G4 do anything?
Ooh, Petrosian would not be a fan of G4. Can you guess why he would not approve this move?
I guess it just opens up the king.
Closes the bishop diagonal, so you play h4.
Yeah, I mean, just not even looking at variations here. So, in general here, by playing g4, you're opening up the kingside front. But in the King's Indian, you generally don't want to do this. You want to keep that closed, and you want to retain an attack where your advantage is on the queen side. So really, you're just giving black an avenue for attack. And positionally, too, you weaken f4 and h4. So, for example, a play might go h takes, knight takes. Black could play knight takes and queen g5 with a good position.
Open up that H file too.
Yeah, and in fact, this just looks like it's probably winning because of f5.
Oh, okay.
But if black wanted to play it positionally too, he could play knight h5 and come to f4, and it looks very scary. But yeah, but instead of g4, try to think of a way to solve this problem of defending e4.
I guess the only thing left, maybe either the king or the rook.
Well, the king might be a little bit flamboyant, playing king g2, f3.
That's Stiglitz's plan.
Did he play anything?
I admire the boldness, though.
Did he play anything like df5?
By what?
Bishop f5 or something like that?
Oh, this is not tall. This is Petrosian. This move also makes a huge impression once you see it.
That's what I was thinking.
The rook e1. Yep.
Wow.
Although the rook looks nice on c1, in fact, it's actually not doing anything.
Yeah, so,
It's just attacking an empty c file. The rook on c6 is doing something, attacking d6 and d6. So just iron logic. It's hard to pry a rook away from an open file like that. But if you think about it just coldly like that, then you can see that it's important to defend this. So, yeah, that is Prophylaxis. He was really the first guy since Dimzovich to take my system so seriously. And black here is just desperately trying to get some counterplay. Kasparov notes some improvement for black, but it's a pretty bleak position regardless. So again, Prophylaxis, he's expecting knight g5. So when it comes, he can play h4. Now black is threatening f2, so white just plays rook f1. The rook has done its job protecting e4, so just moves it back. Although it looks like black might be able to do something here, it's just an illusion. Now knight g5, looks like black is accumulating some firepower over there, but it's just an illusion. Queen b3, attacking the rook and defending f3. Now, although Petrosian had this penchant or notoriety for being passive, he could see tactics. You can't play defensive chess without seeing tactics. So he was sharp, just in a different manner. So again, black's pieces move back, and he just takes the pawn. And apparently, as Petrosian liked to say from here, you don't need to think in these positions. You have an extra pawn. Your opponent doesn't have counterplay. And really, it's worth looking at how he converts, but it's not really anything fancy. And now here we can play f3, but black has no material over here to attack white with. A pair of rooks has been exchanged. White is a passed pawn, so it's no longer a concern. By the way, here he moved the rook again because white threatens rook c5. Just going to mention that tactical point. And black, impatient, played g5, giving Petrosian this awesome f5 square. Point is, if black takes the rook, then white queens. So the queen is stuck. And although black does win this b pawn, white has a pretty irresistible attack. And then black resigned because queen takes f7 is unavoidable. So yeah, this game also makes a pretty huge impression for me anyway. Seeing a move like rook e1, it's really only a move that you're going to see if you just look at the position, evaluating it very concretely and logically. And this is something he was very good at. Many chess players might get a little bit too emotionally attached to that c file. Think, oh, it's good there in principle. Yes, but if you have no target, then it's not doing anything. So, does anybody have any questions about that game? No? All right. Back to you, Lucas.
All right. Thank you, Warren. So yes, logic. As Warren says, logic was the number one word, and Petrosian liked to repeat it over and over again. He liked to talk about the fact that he was, that was his credo when he was talking about his chess style. He'd say, "That's how I play. I play with logic guiding everything I do." And it seems simplistic, and you might think that he was unemotional. That would be incorrect. We'll get to the emotion part a bit later. First, let's talk after he won the championship in Georgia, and he played in Armenia, and he played some tournaments. He obtained a master title. He was invited to Moscow, as every single chess player in the Soviet Union was after World War II. Leningrad, or St. Petersburg, was still reeling from the siege they'd suffered. And he moved to Moscow. He played in the Canada tournaments in 1953. We just saw one of the matches there. And the joke is because he did better than Geller, he was able to court his future wife Rona instead of Geller. That's kind of a story, but it's true that both young men were courting her. Rona Petrosian is a remarkable wife, and we need to talk about it for many reasons. But just to get through the photo, Rona had a previous marriage and had a son, Mikhail or Misha, through the first marriage. That's the taller boy in the picture. And Petrosian had married her when Misha was 4, adopted him as his own son, and Misha called him Dad. And then Rona and Tigran had a child together named Vartan, named after Tigran's father, because Tigran was Tigran Bartanovich, son of Vartan. Rona was not just a wife, she was kind of a manager and a strategist and a planner. And there were many, and she was also a chess player, a pretty good chess player, who was sometimes critical of her husband when he would play like a wild variation. She'd be like, "What the heck are you doing pulling that out?" So let me give you just a taste for the types of things she'd do. She did some things that you might recall, from when we talked about Botvinnik's wife or Tal's wife. She took care of all the day-to-day stuff. Children, house, all that stuff, so that her husband could focus on chess. And we've heard that before. But she also was very good at negotiating, I'll put in air quotes, with the Communist Party to get, perks for the family. She knew who to talk to and how to push their buttons and what she could ask for and get. And in a system where everything was controlled, a distribution was controlled by the Communist Party, who you knew and who you associated with and how you formed rapport with them was very important for providing for your family. And so it was a very important way for her husband to go from sharing a 12 square meter apartment, which is a little over about 140 square foot apartment with several other people, to a 3-room apartment suite essentially in Moscow, which was pretty unheard of for young families in the Soviet Union at this time who were not connected to the party, in other words. And so she was very good at lobbying party officials. She took care of all the day-to-day stuff. She was also extremely good at tournament strategy. So here's what they would do. Tigran would play his match, and he'd get his result, and he'd look at the standings and kind of see, okay, tomorrow, can I go for a draw or do I need a win? Well, what Rona would do is she'd look at the adjourned games, and she'd see if there were any adjourned games by involving players that were ranked ahead of Tigran currently in the standings. And then she would convince Tigran and a couple of other people that were handy, like Averbach or whoever, to go over and meet with the opponent of that player to help go over the adjourned position. Basically, like, she would rally a group of people to go over there and join that player's team for a day, to help him get a win, because it would help Petrosian win the tournament. And so she was pretty clever in the way that she'd do that too. And so she was instrumental in his success. They stayed married from 1953 until Petrosian died in the early 80s. So they had a long and very loving marriage. Unlike Tal, because Rona was kind of appreciated by the Soviet Party, and because she was so instrumental in helping Tigran organize his tournament activity, she even chose what tournaments he entered. She was able to travel quite frequently with her husband to international tournaments. You remember Tal's wife, not always the case because they wanted some insurance to prevent defection. Rona was able to travel with Tigran to pretty much all of his international tournaments, which was a very rare treat for a wife during that time. So, after the marriage and with Tigran's hard work, his chess ability improved greatly. He obtained the master title on his first try, obtained grandmaster title in the early 1950s, and then he won his first USSR championship in 1959. He often says that the period between 1958 and 1963 was the best time of his chess life, not necessarily when he was the strongest, but when he was the most motivated, when he wanted to get out there and play and win. And so in Tbilisi, his hometown, the USSR Championship was held in a very cold winter of 1959, and Petrosian came out on top, edging out Tal and Spassky and many other names who you will recognize. And this was a sign. I mean, the players knew that he was a strong player and that he's up and coming, and he might one day challenge Smyslov or Botvinnik for the World Championship. But this was really proof that he was at that level. And so in 1962, the candidates tournament was held to determine who would challenge Botvinnik for the World Championship in 1963. At this point, it's worthwhile to note that FIDE was established in about 1950. They gained more prominence in organizing events in and organizing the World Championship process. This is after Alyekin died, and Botvinnik won the tournament to be named World Champion. And they adopted a 3-year cycle for World Championships. So from this point on, you're gonna see championships in 1963, 66, 69, 72, 75, and I think they continued after that as well. But you're gonna see 3-year cycles here. So the candidates competition was in 1962, and then the World Championship was in 1963. There are a couple of interesting things to note about this tournament. First, you will see that Petrosian and Keres and Petrosian and Geller drew against each other all 4 matches. You'll see that Keres and Geller drew against each other all 4 matches. This is the tournament that Bobby Fischer accused the Russians of collusion for. You may remember after a tournament in this tournament in 1962, Bobby Fischer alleged that that Petrosian, Keres, and Geller colluded to obtain quick draws to save their strength to beat Fischer. He also put forth the idea that Korchnoi was told by Soviet officials to lose his matches against Keres and Geller so that and Petrosian, so that it would give them more, and then the fight against Fischer to improve the scores of his contemporaries and help strengthen the notion that a Russian would play against Botvinnik for the World Championship. Now, there is quite a bit of truth to the first point. The fact that there were very quick draws between Petrosian, Keres, and Geller. In fact, they averaged 19 moves, which is pretty short in the grand scheme of things. For the second point, that Korchnoi lost intentionally, that I don't think, the experts who've looked at this don't really find any justification for that. But anyway, we'll talk about that more in the Fischer lecture, which is coming up in October. So Petrosian edged out Keres and Geller, who were both pretty good friends of him, particularly Geller. They were really good friends. And he won the right to challenge Botvinnik in the World Championship. Now, the World Championship, this was a tournament, right? A round-robin tournament, but the World Championship was match play. And Petrosian speaks very favorably in his books about match play. He says that that's very suited to his temperament and to his style, that he feels like match play is his strong point. And from this point on, the candidates tournament becomes match play with brackets, and the World Championship, of course, is match play. And from here on out, we see Petrosian doing well in the Candidates Tournament or in the World Championship for pretty much all the way through 1975, really. So he stays prominent in the chess scene for many, many years because match play works well for him. And this materializes in his match against Botvinnik. He wins. It wasn't necessarily a walkover like when Alyekhin beat Owa in their return match. That was a bit of a drubbing. It wasn't that bad, but it was a clear win for Petrosian. It was best of 24. They didn't need the 23rd or 24th games, and Petrosian won in fairly straightforward fashion. And this was the last time that Botvinnik would be world champion. You remember he beat Tal in their return match, and he beat Smyslov before that in their return match. And it's also the last time he'd be a contender, really, a strong contender for the world championship. So 1963 was the end, if you will, of the Botvinnik era, which is certainly remarkable. 1966. Petrosian is now the defender, so he's defending his title, and it's the first time since 1928 that the reigning champion has won. In 1928, Alyekhin defeated Bogolyubov, but then in 1935, when Alyekhin contested it against Owa, he lost. He won the return match, then he died. Then Botvinnik was awarded the world championship. Didn't defend against Smyslov, but then Smyslov didn't defend against Botvinnik, who didn't defend against Tal, who didn't defend against Botvinnik, who didn't defend very well against Petrosian. So it went back, it bounced around a lot, and this was the first title defense. He was world champion for 6 years, and that was a fairly long stint. Now that they're having regular world championships again, there aren't any wars to disrupt them this time around. So it was a clear win for Petrosian, and he was able to retain that championship for a bit longer, which we'll see. But before we get to that, let's look at a couple of matches from those world championships, and I'll turn that back over to Warren.
Thanks, Lucas. And the first game I'm going to show between Petrosian and Botvinnik from their world championship match, it really kind of speaks volumes about his pragmatism in games. So he took a very practical approach. So that kind of did result in a lot of draws. But what I'm talking about is he would not mind getting into positions that were equal as long as he saw a way for him to improve his position. So although this did result in a lot of draws, it also helped him avoid unnecessarily risky situations where he would lose, and it would also lull his opponents into like a false sense of security a lot of times. It'd be a dead equal position, they would think everything's fine, but he'd keep fighting and fighting and fighting and improving his position, and he would eventually cause them to make mistakes or they would mess up. Now, in a lot of ways, that's kind of similar to Nakamura today. Now, of course, their styles outside of this fighting ideas are quite different, right? Nakamura likes very complicated positions. He likes to mix things up, play aggressively. That's not Petrosian, but like Nakamura, they're both kind of fighters. So I think they're similar in that respect. He would just play on and on and on. So, as you'd expect from Petrosian, it's a pretty conservative opening. And I think also because of this, Botvinnik wasn't really feeling like very feisty. I think he thought Petrosian was fine with a draw because at the beginning of the match, Botvinnik took a quick game off Petrosian, and I think he felt Petrosian was still trying to get his footing and get chess going. So I don't think Botvinnik thought Petrosian was ambitious this game. So it goes from a very, I should mention the opening here. So this is a pretty innocuous line against the Grunfeld. Black can equalize easily with what he played, d takes c4, or even just c5, and it's basically a reverse Tarrasch defense. You know, white will often end up with an isolated queen pawn, or white can dissolve the center, and c and d pawns will be traded, and they'll be pretty equal. So he was not really playing for a big opening edge in this match. Now, although this position is somewhat equal, black has to be careful because black has 3 pawn islands. as opposed to white's 2. And this pawn on e6 is also a bit of a weakness. So although black is still somewhat okay, he has to be careful here. White has a nice trump at that. And Petrosian loved to play a position like this, with a nice little trump that he could expand off of. Now, I should mention here too, after a lot of analysis, they later came to the conclusion that knight a6 was probably a better move here, with the idea of c4 followed by knight c5, perhaps bringing the knight to d3. So this was probably a better plan here. So it looks like Petrosian's just playing for a draw, trading rooks, but he had other ideas in mind. He was just trying to reduce black's counterplay, actually. So here he attacks e6, kind of awkward to defend. Black has to play rook e8. So already white's achieving something nice. He has his knight on e4. And being able to achieve a knight outpost in the center like that, it's nothing to laugh at. Now here a little tactical point. So knight takes a2 is not such a good idea because of rook a1, knight b4, bishop takes, and now rook b7. And this is actually a pretty hard position for black to defend. Although black has his passed b pawn, with the knight and rook it's not going anywhere. And meanwhile black's going to constantly have to worry about threats to the king over here. So he didn't go in for this. He just put the knight on d5. If anybody has any questions, by the way, just go ahead and stop me. And here's a good point too. So white has achieved some nice things here. He has knight on e4. He has no real weaknesses. But at this point, it's going to take more than a nice knight and a slight weakness on e6 to win. So white has to create a new weakness for black. So take a moment here and see if you can figure out a way to do that. What was that?
b4.
Yep. The pawn can't be taken because of the pin on the c file. So black's going to have to either let the pawn sit there and let white isolate it when white really does have a couple targets to go after. And then it's going to get trickier. So instead black decided to push. But this is very committal because now white plays a very strong b5. And now this pawn is essentially cut off. He's kind of behind enemy lines now. His friends are not going to be able to defend him anymore. He's kind of on his own. And I don't know how to phrase this in terms of being a rule or anything, but whenever you manage to give your opponent 2 weaknesses, that's usually a very good sign things are going your way, because one weakness you're usually okay with defending, but in the long term, if you have 2, it's going to be a difficult defense. And here that means e6 and c4. And it turns out to be true here. The second weakness really makes it hard for black. So white just blockades. So white's attacking the c pawn. Now black can take on d2, but after king takes, white's going to play king c3, b4, and this pawn's going to be hard to defend. So instead he decided to push the pawn. But the pawn stays a weakness. Unfortunately, black isn't able to protect the pawn anyway. And now this was probably the critical point, actually. So black played rook h1, but this was a mistake. The point is kind of subtle, though. What do you think might be the best way to defend here as black? If you'd rather me just explain it, I can do that too. But if anybody wants to take a shot, they can go for it.
Rook a1.
Rook a1, interesting. I think white would probably just play king b3. I mean, this is fine though, but only if you see the same move that's black's best here. Rook a1 isn't necessary.
Rook g1.
No, rook g1 doesn't make any difference.
Maybe exchange the minor pieces and try to hold on.
Yes, yes. Bishop takes e3 provides black much better chance of defending. But the reason for it may not be so obvious. So what might be your reasoning for taking the knight? Bishop is usually better than knight in endgame, right?
But this is a bad bishop. And it's not there.
Yeah, the bishop's not exactly the best piece, right? It doesn't really have any great targets, and it's kind of exiled temporarily. Now, in principle, the reason you might want to exchange is, and Anand has mentioned this before today as well, if you have an advantage, like material advantage especially, an extra pawn, it's a lot easier to convert if you have dislike minor pieces.
If you have dislike minor pieces.
Yeah. That may seem kind of strange, but the idea is that you'll have an attacker that your opponent can't replicate. So you'll be able to attack in ways that your opponent cannot defend. I'm not sure if that makes sense necessarily. I tried to think of an analogy in the last couple days, but I couldn't think of any good analogy, so I hope that makes some sense. And that's actually helped me a lot in converting my own games. So what that means is that, say you're in an endgame and you have an extra pawn. If you have a chance where you can say, like, for example, say you have all 4 minor pieces on the board. If you can trade, say, bishop for a knight or knight for bishop, that'd be good, just to get unlike minor pieces. So you'd rather go into an endgame a pawn up with knight and bishop than with, say, bishop and bishop or knight versus knight. So I found that very helpful in my own games. You have a question?
If the bishop wasn't there, if bishop had spot,
Yeah.
let's say it was on G7. I still
Sure.
don't think you would take the knight, right?
It would still be the best shot, actually. Because this knight on e4, it's also because the knight's placement here, but the knight on e4 provides white a lot of great opportunities. They can go to d6 and g5 and really attack these weaknesses.
But I'm saying like in an open position where pawns are on all sides of the board.
Yeah.
If they were just in one area, I would think, okay, keep the knight. But since you got to be moving everywhere, then the bishop might be better to be able to get quicker. I mean, the knight,
Yeah.
he can go eat that h7, take that a7 pawn, let's say, but then he's out of the game for a little while.
No, it's definitely a good rule of thumb. Generally speaking, you want bishop over knight in the endgame. But in the case where you have an extra pawn, your opponent's not going to have the time to go around snatching up your pawns, usually. So in that event, you're just trying to figure out how to make your opponent's pieces passive or break through with your extra pawn. And for whatever reason, it turns out that having dislike minor pieces really helps. Now, I haven't seen an analogy yet. I wish I had a good one for you, but you'll just have to take it on faith, I guess. You know, much stronger players than me have espoused this kind of idea. And Kasparov actually mentions it in his book about the rook endgame. Rook endgame is being hard to win generally. So that's why he was saying it was better defense to take the knight here, because rook on pawn endgames are notoriously drawn, right? So it's much easier to defend that than, say, a minor piece endgame. So that's the concrete reason, I guess. The more general reason that might help you in your own games is that it's easier to convert if you have dislike minor pieces. So anyway, long tirade. I think it's worth it, though. So here he sacks a pawn back just with the idea of keeping the knight. He sees that the h-pawn is not exactly crucial to white's playing here. Instead, he wants to dominate black with pieces. So black has no time to take g2 because of rook c7. And black's going to be too passively placed on the 7th rank. Of course, now white's king becomes very active. Yeah, this also ties into the quality position that I was talking about earlier. His quality position is just so high here. A dominant knight, a dominant king, rook on the open file. The harmony is pretty nice to look at. So here he's threatening rook e6. That's his conception here. And then driving black back further. White just continues to smother black. And here the point is that rook takes a4 is not so strong because of
Check.
knight d6, king b8, then what?
because of NF6 and ND5?
Yeah, knight d6 is kind of rushed. There's a better spot for the knight.
And C3 and ND5.
Knight C3.
Interesting.
And then knight D5.
Oh, you can even go to NG5 and ND6. And it's open.
You know, knight c3 is interesting. Kasparov does not mention this move, but I don't see a defense. Yeah, knight d5 looks pretty decisive. Yeah, that also looks like a win. But yeah, the move that's mentioned is knight g5, with the idea of knight e6, king d7, and black's going to get mated. But yeah, it looks like, you know, knight c3 also looks decisive, though. I don't really see defense for that either. It's probably one of those positions where there's more than one road to roam. Okay. So anyway, going back to the game, he played rook d1, try to defend along this d file. But of course the knight comes into e6 instead. And here he finally resigned. Oh, h7's falling, g6 is falling. It's not really much hope. So I mean, the takeaway from that game is fighting in an equal position, trying to give your opponent more weaknesses, really caring about quality of position, and just incrementally improving your position. Does anybody have any questions about that? Not the most exciting sacrificial game in the world, but I think it's pretty instructive. You know, I see so many games now where people just agree to draws in equal positions. Oh, it's equal, why play it out? You know, maybe because of my, you know, well, my coach had a penchant for Petrosian too. That frustrates me when I see that, because you know, you can easily play on in an equal position and give problems for your opponent to solve. But anyway, it's just me giving my spiel. Nakamura has the same things to say about modern players too. And then I think the Spassky game was also mentioned, right?
Yes.
This is a pretty cool game too, and this is another King's Indian defense. So I probably gave up what the result of the game is going to be.
This is 1966. This
Yes.
is the first time they...
This was from their 1966 World Championship match. And I think this was the first decisive game in Game 7. So this was the first win he took off Spassky. So the English opening was something Petrosian commonly employed. I think we've already seen it employed once in the game before against Botvinnik. So this is very common for him. Now, e5 was the fashion at the time, although nowadays it turns out that rook b8 is likely a much stronger move, simply to keep the bishop open for a little bit longer. Maybe black could take advantage of that. But at the time, it was still, King's Indian defense was still not really so well figured out, and it was just common back then to build this pawn structure and then hope for a kingside attack. If anything about the opening doesn't make sense, please feel free to ask. So this move may look odd, but his idea is to play f3 and kick out this knight.
Is black's king weak at all?
No, and it's partly because of the lack of any white pieces that can take advantage of the king, at least at the moment. So right now, with the pieces over here on the queen side, black's not really much risk. Now, here was kind of an important turning point. So Spassky obviously knew of Petrosian's penchant for playing well in closed, slow positions. So Spassky in this match really wanted to try to create open positions, try to mix things up. He wanted to test Petrosian. So he played e4 here. Now, strictly speaking, knight h6 was probably a better move. But like I said, he wanted to create complications. So by this way, he attacks the rook and gives himself a nice square on e5 for the knight. But positionally opens up a hole on f4, which is not pleasant. And here in this position, black faces some definite positional issues, because if white's given a few moves, white's going to play knight e3, knight g2, knight f4, And white's going to have quite a grip on the king side here. And with the pawn structure locked like that in black with this extra weakling on f5, it's going to be a long, hard defense. And black also has this stray guy on a5 who's not exactly very active. So that's a problem for black too. So Spassky decided it was time to strike, so he played f4. Again, he wants to keep this position as open as possible. But unfortunately, it's not really so sound. His idea was bishop h3. So the first point is that f takes e5 loses. Black has queen g5 check, followed by mate. And the second point was that he wanted to try to invade on the king side here. So he was expecting a move like, say, rook f2, and where now he could play knight g6, and black has a pretty nice king side, possibly attack going. He can take on f4, play queen h4, and it's kind of dangerous looking. So I guess he was kind of optimistic. But I'll give you a hint here, and you'd probably find the move from there. Petrosian, we already went over how Petrosian was famous for the exchange sacrifice. Well, pawn takes knight loses, like I said, to queen g5.
Queen G5,
Yeah, 93. And the simple idea behind this move is white now threatens to take on e5. So of course, while the rook's hanging, black might as well take it. But now black has some problems. So black has no other good square for the knight. But now white plays bishop g4. And white has this very pretty crossfire against the king that's turning out to be quite hard to defend against. And there's really, at this point, it's kind of hard to suggest anything for black. He took on f4, but this move is not so perfect either. Think like Petrosian.
Give up the other rook.
Rook takes knight.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Rook takes knight.
Who says lightning doesn't strike twice?
Yeah.
And now how can white continue to improve his position?
F3.
94.
94, yes. White may have one white way to win here. Now, knight f5, you might have to be careful because queen g5. I don't know if black's getting away here, but it certainly looks like after king h1, say rook f8, it's not immediately obvious anyway. But yes, 94, bringing the last piece into the game, essentially. And it's getting really tricky to suggest anything for black at this point.
The piece you're getting in is, you're saying it's the knight, but it's also the queen, right? Just g2 as well.
Yeah, queen g2 is opened up as a possibility. So queen h4, knight takes d6. You know, the threat to this rook is really hard to play against. Now at this point he concludes the game really beautifully. This just goes to show at this point that Petrosian was not just all positional play.
Bishop
H1, H8.
What's that?
Bishop takes first.
Oh no, he can't do that because he's got the...
Yeah, bishop takes, which looks weird at first because you're getting rid of the pin.
Right.
But now, as already been mentioned,
Yeah.
white has the beautiful queen h8.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course the point being that the white knight just cleans up house. Takes all the black pieces basically. So yeah, for me this game is also pretty amazing, being able to sack not one but two exchanges just because white's pieces are so dominant, and this little guy in a5 never did get back into the game. Just exiled forever. So I mean, this kind of game really teaches you that quality of position is just so important, and you shouldn't necessarily be so materialistic. So it is kind of like the idea that Tal had too, not being so materialistic, but instead of getting time like Tal got, he aimed for quality position. Does anybody have any questions about either of those games? Yeah, so this just goes to show how the King's Indian defense did provide for Petrosian's family.
So in 1969, Spassky again qualified to challenge Petrosian in the World Championship, and this time he prevailed. It was a close match. I'm going to skip around a little bit. I got the match score down there. He won 12.5 to 10.5. Got my slides in the wrong order. Let me just, and then. So 1969, they had a rematch, and Spassky won it. It took 23 of the 24 games until it proved decisive, but won by two-point margin, which is significant. And you see Petrosian in the background smiling as Spassky is given the mantle of world champion. And Petrosian had something really interesting to say about his loss, and I'll just read it from this book that was compiled after his death. It says, "Sooner or later one's life comes to the unpleasant moment when one loses his title. Such a moment happened in my life too. When a world champion loses his title, this blow comes as a mighty stroke against his self-respect as a man as well as a sportsman. Strange to tell, I pass this moment rather quietly. Now when I recall all the details of that 1969 match, as well as my state of mind after that match, and when I think of the possible reasons for that calm attitude to this enormous trial, I come to the conclusion that I never treated chess as an instrument for achieving great sporting success. For me, the most important thing was the inner contests of the fight, the inner state of the two opponents at the board. That is why when I was defeated by another chess player and chess intellectual, I realized it was impossible to fight against time. In chess as in life, years pass, and the time comes when one must make way for one's younger and perhaps more progressive opponent. And my consolation was the fact that, even in losing, I won several beautiful games." So you may think he had somewhat of a Zen attitude, and we've already said that he was unshakable at the board, and that he just approached chess with this calm, rational logic, absence of emotion, played strong positionally. But that's not quite true, actually. He may have maintained that facade, but Sosonko points to the fact that Petrosian would often make facial expressions at the board. At first, Sosonko thought this was just like him reacting, not keeping his emotions in check. But then Sosonko realized that it was psychological warfare. We talked about Tal's stare last time, how he would stare fixedly at his opponent and give them this kind of evil look that would kind of unnerve them. What Petrosian would do is he would kind of shrug, or he would look kind of like dubious at a certain move, or he'd keep from laughing, and it was. And sometimes against younger players, they'd wonder if they'd blundered their queen or something. They were that shaken by it. And Sosonko thought originally that was just Petrosian not keeping his emotions in check. But what he found that when Petrosian was in a heated endgame, he stopped doing that. So Sosonko realized that was Petrosian's way of trying to psych his opponent out, which I think is kind of clever. But the truth is, Petrosian did not. Even despite appearances, he was not maintaining calmness. He talks about when he was playing Spassky. They're having a match. Petrosian makes a move, puts his hands in his lap, and what he does is he takes his pulse. And his heart is beating 140, he counts 140 beats per minute. Playing chess, right? He's not running a 5K or a half marathon or something. He's playing chess, and his heart is racing. And so, and it's known, he talks about the fact that he took an anti-anxiety medication from the 1950s onward. Petrosian had to work at reining in his temperament when he was at the board. He was Petrosian, it may benefit you to know, was an ardent sports fan. Soccer, which he calls football, and ice hockey. He was a fervent sports fan, and he was often in the stands yelling and screaming, taking his sons to the games, supporting the team. And his doctors told him, that's not going to work well for maintaining an iron demeanor at the chessboard. So he kind of had to rein that in a little bit. And but he talks about his discipline. He had a strict regimen. He did not drink a drop of alcohol, nor did he touch cigarettes while he was world champion. He exercised, he ate appropriately, he had that level of self-control, and he certainly worked hard. But Petrosian was known for a sense of danger. Everybody keeps, in all the things I've read, people keep saying how he just sniffs out danger and he shuts it down well in advance. Fisher said Petrosian has the ability to see and eliminate danger 20 moves before it arises. I was staggered by Petrosian's ability, after achieving an excellent position, all the time to find maneuvers that strengthened it. So he was held in high esteem by his contemporaries for being very, very difficult to beat. In fact, he only, he lost somewhere in the order of 160 matches in his career out of, say, 2,000, which is a really low number, and he would sometimes lose once or twice a year, so he didn't lose very much, right? Well, from 69 onward, his, as he says, maybe he's getting a little older, maybe he wasn't as strong of a player anymore, and that realization really hit home to him when he was in the Candidates Tournament in 1972. You may know that in 1972, Bobby Fischer was on an absolute tear. And I've got the numbers down there at the bottom. He plays Taimanov, beats him 6-0, which is crazy. He's 6-0's Taimanov. Next round, Larson, 6-0. And at this point, Fischer's on like a 22-game winning streak. Like, he's just shredding people. And then he meets Petrosian in the finals of the Candidates Tournament to determine who's going to play Spassky in the 1973 World Championship. And you see Fischer wins, although you see Petrosian gave him a little tougher time than what he encountered in other opponents on his way. And by the way, I think during this time period, Fischer's performance rating in current standards was almost 2,900, like ridiculous. So, a couple things about this. You'll notice Fischer's games were played in Canada, United States, and Argentina. And Petrosian was Moscow, Argentina. The transition to Argentina was quite difficult for Petrosian for a couple of reasons. Now remember, this is match play. They had to work it out between the players where they were going to play, and FIDE had a say in it, obviously. Petrosian wanted to play in Greece. Greece had come forth and offered, to host the match. He wanted to play there. Fischer wanted to play in Argentina. And when they spoke by phone, and they had to do it through an interpreter, Fischer said he wanted to play in Argentina because they had the best stakes in the world. And actually, I encountered that quote from two different chess players, like from the same time period. So I must travel to Argentina and try their stakes, number one. Number two, I think that Fischer was saying that because he wanted to play in the Americas, in the Western Hemisphere. He wanted Petrosian to be as far away as possible, not just from home, but also from the KGB and also from the Soviet Chess Federation, to kind of erode his confidence, I suppose. And FIDE accepted the bid of Argentina, and Petrosian had to travel then to play in Argentina against Fischer. And one factor, and this actually came up in a KGB report on why the Soviets launched an investigation for why Petrosian lost. And one of the reasons they came up with is the number of Armenian emigres in Argentina. Now, I told you about the Armenian thing a while back, that Petrosian was like a national hero in Armenia, and every time he visited, there were parades and tribal elders who'd come and visit and kiss his hand and this, that, and the other. He had the best suite in the best hotel in Armenia, and everywhere he went, the Armenian ethnic groups that had immigrated, to various places, wanted to visit with him, wanted him to come to dinner, wanted him to address an audience, and they were particularly tickled when he could speak and read in Armenian to them, because they thought at first that he was just, another Russian. And the Armenian contingent was there to support him, but it also was somewhat distracting. And so the KGB report says, well, yeah, it's the Armenian immigrants' fault that Petrosian lost. And it's not just that Petrosian lost, because losing to Fischer at this time is not really a huge deal. It's how he lost. And I want you to take a look at the progression of the match score. Fischer 1.0, then 1-1, 1.5, 1.5, 2-2, 2.5, 2.5, tied halfway through the match, and then Fischer wins 4 games in a row, blows Petrosian off the board. Petrosian has never, ever lost, I don't think he's ever lost 3 games in a row in his career, much to one opponent, much less 4. This is unheard of. So Petrosian is very shocked by this, and Sasanko talks about him muttering for weeks and months and weeks and months after he gets back to Russia, saying, he's not a genius, he's not a genius, he's not a genius. He's not a genius, talking about Fischer, because everybody's saying, oh, Fischer's, a chess genius, blah, blah, blah. But Petrosian does say in his book that Fischer was a hard worker. He said, Fischer works as hard as our entire delegation put together. So he was complimentary of Fischer, but he attributed it more to his work ethic and to the fact that he was playing in Argentina rather than Petrosian, having lost his touch, if you will. So this was a shocking loss to Petrosian. Now for our last exploration of chess, we'll go to 1974 from the next round of candidates matches. This is from round 1 where Petrosian was playing Portish.
Thanks. No, I'd actually always called it Portiche. Is it actually Portish?
I don't know if you say Portiche. Let's go with that.
I don't know. That's always the way I've read it. Just curious. Okay. Yeah, so this last game is also just from a position. We're not going to look at the entire game. And like you said, this was from the candidates tournament, or match, I should say. And after, I don't know what move number this is, after 20 or 30 moves from the opening, we came to this position. And Portiche's last move was the cute Queen F4. Now, he does 2 things with this move. He threatens the rook on c1, and he threatens to play Queen e4 and Queen g4. Queen e4 pinning the knight, Queen g4 threatening knight f4. So black creates a couple of nice threats with this cute move. And I call it cute because the idea is that if white takes, then black takes and wins the pawn. So take a moment here, and how might you think like Petrosian? And while you're thinking, by the way, I'll mention that's a little story. So someone once asked Petrosian what his favorite piece was, and he said, "I don't care as long as it's an extra one." Just speaking more to his logic and lack of really serious emotion. So I'll give you another hint. So think about quality of position.
I can't go to
If 95, remember you lose his rook.
Rook e1.
So rook e1 looks tempting, but black can play rook c8 and grab the open file. Black can still just leave the queen there. Actually, you'll have to forgive me, that doesn't work. So rook e1, rook c8, white wins by rook takes e6. But instead, black can play queen g4, threatening knight f4. And now, say a move like king h2, black can play rook c8 now.
So queen e3.
Queen e3. So I think black will nonetheless play queen e4. This queen is pretty annoying there.
Rook c3.
So rook c3 again. I think black's going to play queen e4.
What is he bidding for again?
To centralize the queen, pin the knight. It's hard to see a way for white to really improve much once the queen gets so active. Because you can't ever take the queen, because after d takes, d pawn falls. Was there a suggestion? I think I heard rook c6. Interesting. So I think black can still play queen e4 though.
Knight to d2.
What's that?
Maybe knight to d2. Go 4.
Knight d2 here?
Yeah.
I think you lose this d
Oh
pawn.
yeah, that's right. Queen d2.
Queen d2, black takes and then takes.
I see the theme here. King h3.
King h3, you lose a rook.
Oh.
So you may notice a theme with all your suggestions. I'm always moving the queen.
Yeah, no, pinning the knight. That's
So according to Petrosian logic, since the problem is black is always moving the queen somewhere, how can you solve this problem most simply? Yeah. Get rid of it. Yes, it loses a pawn, but he takes into account quality of position, which we'll see is pretty important. So black's won this pawn, cool, but unfortunately black stopped his evaluation too early. So now after rook c3, black kind of has a problem. So this knight doesn't have so many good squares. He does have b4, but he underestimated the power of white's position here. This knight being stuck on the edge of the board turned out to be pretty serious.
About rook d7.
Yes, this was his intention actually, but unfortunately, what he did not see was rook c8 check, followed by king h7 and b5.
Wait a second.
And if he plays rook c7, unfortunately, this guy is trapped.
What about nc7?
Yeah.
Yes, he can play knight c7, but now white can get activity with knight e5, and he can either play knight c6 and win the pawn back, or he can play a4 and play for dominance. In either event, it's not an easy position for black. So this is what he missed. He underestimated the activity of white's rook and passivity of the knight. Even the white king ends up playing a role here. So he played knight b8, trying to route this knight around to d7. But it turns out this is kind of slow. Rook c7, a5, and now b5, fixing the weakness on b6. And this is really hard to defend. This rook on the 7th, knight coming to e5, it's pretty hard to stop. Now he played knight d7. Now by the way, if black were to play a move like f6, then how might white proceed here?
King d4, f5.
Yeah, I mean, there are actually a couple good options. So king f4 is strong, with the sadly hard to defend against idea of king f5, king g6. Oh my gosh. King f5, king g6, and it's sadly hard to defend against this threat. Now the other plan white can play is h5, followed by knight h4, f5. And this is also very strong with the same idea of attacking the king side. So it's a very awkward position to defend. And here, white just continues activating the king. And here's where we really see Petrosian's really accurate evaluation coming here. The value of his king is just so much greater than this guy. His king being active really makes a big difference. And after knight e5, it's really hard to say what black can do here. Because if you play knight takes e5, the white king just walks in. And at this point, you're going to lose a b6 pawn or d5. And either way, white gets a passed pawn that white can shepherd with the king. So taking the knight is just not an option for black. So you play knight f8. But unfortunately, this b pawn is going to cost black too much. And from here, it's not so hard for white. And then black resigned. So I think this is just a great example of using, again, iron logic over just pure materialism. So I think it's a great example of that for them. Does anybody have any questions about this game?
How much time was left on Petrosian's clock when he took that queen? It's probably okay. It's out of the way.
No, that I don't know. I didn't see any annotations, any description of the time usage or anything. Now, Petrosian was a fast player. He generally always had more time than his opponents, apparently.
He was one of the best blitz players in the world.
Yeah.
There's an anecdote of Bobby Fischer visiting Moscow when Fischer was 15, and he goes to the chess club there, and he's playing blitz against all these different chess masters, and he's beating them all, just handing them, their tails, and so the director of the chess club calls Petrosian and said, "Get over here." And Petrosian shows up and defends their honor and thrashes Fischer because he's the stronger blitz player at this time, But Petrosian was one of the top 5 blitz players in the world for sure for a solid 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah, he once said that he could judge his form in chess by how well he played blitz. If he wasn't playing good blitz, then his intuition wasn't right and he needed to study. That was apparently how he did things. I'm not sure if modern players take that approach, but that was how he judged his strength anyway. He thought intuition was an important part of it. Yeah. Any other questions?
became friends, right?
You're thinking of Tall.
No, Tall and Fischer.
Yeah.
Petrosian became a friend.
No,
Yeah.
Petrosian was a pretty, I don't want to say a hardline communist, but he was a believer. He was a real believer in East versus West. And, he had a hard time forming any kind of amicable relationship with non-Russian players. And that was true, like Korchnoi went from one of his best friends to really an enemy when Korchnoi defected. And left the Soviet Union. He kind of towed the party line there. No, he was not really on amicable terms with Fischer, nor was he on hostile terms. But no, Tal and Fischer got along pretty well. They chatted quite a bit.
Was it true that Fischer was kind of bored with Petrosian's style of play?
No, he respected it. Yeah, he
bored as in because he just played really just solid and.
Oh no, Fischer had really admired him. There's I don't know the quote exactly, but Kasparov quotes a Fischer statement about Petrosian. It was very respectful. I think you mentioned what I said earlier, and that I basically partially plagiarized about Petrosian really being the first player since Nimzovich to take quality positions so seriously, and prophylaxis and such.
Fischer was frustrated by certain Soviet players because he didn't do well against them. Petrosian was one of them, Tal was another.
Korchnoi was also an enemy of Fischer. Now, on the board, anyway.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right.
Okay, so a little bit to wrap up here. We'll talk about toward the twilight, I guess you could say, of Petrosian's career. After his unsuccessful bid to challenge Fischer in 1975. Of course, Karpov never got to challenge Fischer either in 1975 because Fischer refused to play anymore. Come back in October and we'll discuss that. Petrosian still played. He won the USSR championship in 1975, so don't discount his abilities. But in the late 70s, early 80s, he had health issues. Fairly young. He died at the age of 55 in 1983. Toward the end of his life, he realized that he was not going to be the top chess player, and so he really took on the role as teacher. He'd show up at the chess club all the time, just like Botvinnik, and was really involved in the next generation. So here he is with young Garry Kasparov, just casually taking a picture while Kasparov is sweating his upcoming match, and he got involved in Kasparov's training. He also worked with Karpov, as most of the Soviet masters at the time did. And his big passion, though, was gardening. He had a dacha, a little country house, reserved kind of for the Russian elite out in the countryside. And there he and his wife, had lots of flowers and pots and vegetable garden and all that sort of thing. And that's how he enjoyed spending his time. He said if he could have, derived... if he could have had the same quality of life from gardening as he did from chess, he, probably would have never been world champion. So that was his passion. Garden, cats, that sort of thing. But he was also really interested in teaching. And toward the end of his life, he decided to compile his lessons and try to publish them. Now, unfortunately, he passed away before he was able to do that. But after he passed away, some other people stepped in and organized his notes and published them. And the book, one of the books that I used and I quoted from is Petrosian's Legacy. And in this book, each chapter is basically a lesson, and a lesson that's illustrated by games. It's actually surprisingly similar to what Nimzovich did with My System. Kind of comes full circle. Nimzovich had all these chapters on like prophylaxis and blockade and this, that, and the other. Petrosian doesn't give them any fancy titles like that, or really revolve around a whole main idea, but like he has a chapter on like the positional exchange sacrifice, which we've gone over, and he talks about you know, what thinking he does when he decides to do a positional sacrifice or decides that it's an option. And that's what he really focuses on in his training when he worked with other people, and in his writings. He wanted to teach people how to think. And that's a lofty goal, but if you read this book, and Kasparov has very high praise for this particular book of Petrosian's teaching, talks about how, you know, he's read through it several times, and each time he reads it, he gets something new and different out of it. And that's kind of what Petrosian said about Nimzovich's book, Chess Praxis. So, you know, it's that circle coming back again. Toward the end of his life, Petrosian, who was not playing as well over the board, tried to contribute through his teaching. He did have health issues, which in 1981 he was given a diagnosis that he had about 2 years to live. Cancer. He was trying to fight it, and it's possible that if he would have had access to Western medicine, you know, he could have a surgery might have been successful, and he could have enjoyed a longer life. But you know, that option wasn't available to him, and so he played chess up to the end and tried to keep on a positive, you know, genial face. But it was clear that you know, that his health was failing. So at the age of 55 in 1983, he passed away, fairly young age. Anyway, the books that I used for this were primarily one written by Petrosian, one written by Kasparov about, you know, from the Great Predecessor series. I've used that in every single work cited so far, so I think highly of it. Sasanko I've used before in a lecture. He had three chapters on Petrosian, by far more content than he had on any other player. And then I used Vasilyev's book as well. Vasilyev was a Russian GM who played quite a bit with Petrosian, knew him personally, and put together some of his greatest games. I have all those books with us. You're welcome to take a look. Any questions about what we've gone over? I never can include everything because I have only so much time, but no?
No,
Okay.
awesome.
Thank you, guys.